Number 5 on this list is that green orb. Major Gordon Cooper was one of the earliest American astronauts there was. He was the last astronaut to ever fly in space completely by himself, a feat that's honestly just terrifying if you ask me. While he was out there in space, Cooper saw something that he couldn't explain and something that just doesn't make any sense. It was a rapidly approaching green orb, something that was actually picked up by the radar system that was tracking him in Australia. He couldn't fully make out what it was, but he knew that it was a big object and that it was glowing green. Cooper has since come out and discussed his strong belief in UFOs and aliens. It turns out that UFO sightings are not as uncommon as we may think for astronauts or the government, that these sightings happen very frequently and are very often covered up. For many years I have lived with a secret, and a secrecy imposed on all specialists in astronautics. I can now reveal that every day in the USA, our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this, but nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means. Now that's a direct quotation from Major Gordon Cooper discussing the truth behind his sighting and many other sightings that the government makes on the daily. If this is factual and the government actually does see these anomalies all the time, then it's totally reasonable to believe Cooper saw a real-life UFO while he was in space that time. It should also be noted that when he landed, he was told that reporters were not allowed to ask him about his sighting and to keep it under wraps. Seems to me like these astronauts and the government know some stuff that they don't want getting out.
Moving on to number 4, plasma waves. As NASA aptly stated, space is not empty, nor is it silent. Nobody can hear you scream in space. Space contains a whole lot of energetic charged particles, which behave a lot differently than what we have on Earth. In magnetic fields, including the ones that surround Earth, there are particles that are constantly tossed around by the motion of electromagnetic waves that are known as plasma waves. And the ones that exist in space make some really interesting noises. Give it a listen. Some sound like roaring waves, while others sound a little bit like whistling. I think the whistling might even be a little bit creepier.
Moving on to number 3, we have the Soyuz 11. On June 6, 1971, 3 Soviet cosmonauts launched into space. Their goal was to make a record for the longest time spent in space. Sadly, the mission failed and they became the first people to die in space. Now, the spacecraft landed perfectly, but when the team opened the hatch, they found all 3 crew members dead. Their faces filled with dark blue spots and blood dripping from their ears and noses. What happened was their breathing ventilation valve ruptured. They died from decompression. They died within seconds. It happened so fast that they couldn't even get a word out, so I'm kind of cheating by putting this one on the list, but the last thing heard from them was a gasp for air, then a weird popping sound, probably from the air in their lungs expanding from the drop in air pressure and being exposed to the vacuum of space. To me, that is more terrifying than hearing them plead for mercy. Like, you're literally hearing them die.
Number 2 on this list is space pee. Okay, so I know how that sounds. No, I'm not talking about some evil urine alien that somebody spotted or some massive pea planet. But this entry is just more about how hard it is to actually live up there in space and the realities of the situation. Also, I guess this is less of a secret, but more of something that just doesn't get talked about enough considering how much it must suck. But listen to this statistic, guys. If you want to go into space and live up there for 1 year, which I frankly don't really understand why you would want to do, but anyways, let's assume that you do want to do that. If you want to go live there for 1 year, then you're gonna need to drink 730 liters of your own urine and sweat. 730 liters. That is 730 milk bags worth of your own excrement that you now need to consume. Now, I obviously have to point out that this is recycled urine and recycled sweat, so you don't need to just pee in a cup and then take a sip or anything like that. But this just goes to show how difficult it is to come by water in space. It's so difficult to get water that we literally need to constantly reuse what we have in our bodies already. Like, you basically never get any new water in your system for an entire year if you go to space. You're just reusing the old water over and over and over again. Honestly, after hearing this stat, guys, I have no idea how these billionaires think that we're getting to Mars. Like, sure, build a ship that can take us there, manufacture a shelter that could withstand the elements, but how about water, dudes? You know, that thing that we need? I don't want to move to Mars and just live off of pee for the rest of my life. Anyways, big respect to the astronauts out there who have to do this for a whole year. You guys are way stronger than me. Finally, number 1 on this list is changing DNA. This one is definitely a weird one and honestly pretty scary. Ranker writes, astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year at the International Space Station in 2016, returned to find that he was 2 inches taller than his departing height. The new physical differences between Kelly and his identical brother Mike, also an astronaut, were startling. Scientists compared the DNA of the two and found that, besides growing 2 inches, Kelly's gut bacteria were completely different and his gene expression had changed. Scientists concluded that the changes were caused by the stresses of space travel, which can cause changes in a cell's biological pathways. Although Kelly eventually returned to his original height, his other genetic changes are seemingly irreversible, meaning Kelly and his brother are no longer identical twins. So that's honestly pretty insane. If we go to space, our DNA can just literally change on us. Obviously, we have no idea how this works, but think about the potential that this could have. Is it possible to harness this ability? To be able to send someone into space and cure a disease that they were born with? Like, this truly feels like some Fantastic Four level stuff right here, where we can actually change our human makeup. Granted, we need to look at it from the other angle as well. Could this be extremely detrimental? Yeah, I think it definitely could. You could go into space and then have your DNA totally change on you in a way that's for the worse, causing you lifelong problems after that. I had no idea that this was something that could happen in space, but it's definitely something that we need to do some more research on because, like, it could be wild.
And number 5, Jupiter's magnetosphere. NASA's spacecraft Juno picked up some of Jupiter's noises as it entered the planet's magnetic field. Now, according to NASA, the magnetosphere is where the movement of particles in space is controlled by what's going on inside of the planet. Juno's principal investigator Scott Bolton said of the event back in June of 2016, I quote, "We've just crossed the boundary into Jupiter's home turf. We're closing in fast on the planet itself and already gaining valuable data." Now, this recording captured the encounter with the bow shock over the course of 2 hours, and it's pretty mysterious and eerie sounding.
Number 4 on this list is space snakes. Franklin Story Musgrave is a former NASA astronaut who spent over 53 days in space. He's extremely intelligent, having 6 separate degrees, and definitely knows about space since he went on 6 separate missions there. That's why when he came out and spoke about seeing a massive space-like eel up there, it really shocked the world. On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It's rubbery because it has internal waves in it and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and some just single-cell organisms and other civilizations that have been around for 1,000,000 years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things. 6, 7, 8 feet long. You heard that right, guys. I know that he goes on to talk about proteins coming together and stuff, but that seems like a lot more than just a few amino acids to me. That's a big creature that he saw not only one time, but on 2 very separate and different occasions. This is a full-on NASA astronaut who is super well educated, coming out and talking about a massive eel in space. Now, he's the only one who's come out and spoken about such things. However, there was a picture released from the Mars rover with potential evidence of a snake. Take a look at that image right there. That looks a lot like a snake to me, and if there's one chilling on Mars, then there's no reason to think that there couldn't be one in space either. If this is true, then more astronauts definitely must know about this, and they must be trying to keep it under wraps for a reason. Maybe they don't want the public to freak out about these space snakes, maybe they're just scared of them themselves and aren't ready to release the info yet. But whatever the case may be, it's starting to look like our slithering pals aren't just here on Earth.
Moving on to number 3, Comet Encounter. In February of 2011, NASA's Stardust spacecraft flew by a comet called Tempel 1 and pelted a bunch of small rocks and dust particles at it. This is what it sounds like. Now, the full audio track is only a fraction of what NASA says was an approximate 5,000 total impacts on the spacecraft over the course of around 11 minutes. Would not want to be that spacecraft. Scientists believe that the flying debris was formed by fragmenting balls of ice and dust. And what's even cooler, this actually helped inform a theory that icy dust balls that leave a comet continually break up in space. Imagine breaking up with your comet only to slam right into a spacecraft. Rough life. And at number 2, Ganymede. Back in 1996, on June 27th, NASA's Galileo spacecraft made its first flyby of Ganymede, which is Jupiter's largest moon. Now, the sound that you're about to hear are the translated radio signals that represent data from Galileo's plasma wave experiment instrument. Pretty freaky, eh? Galileo's encounter with Ganymede was pretty monumental in the way that we look at our solar system, and it discovered many things about Jupiter and its moons, including that Jupiter has an intense radiation belt above its cloud tops, helium in roughly the same concentration as the Sun, and a lot of extensive and rapid resurfacing of the moon load due to volcanism and Ganymede's magnetic field. Neat stuff. And finally, in our number 1 spot, Saturn's radio emissions. This one is perhaps the most eerie. So Saturn is a source of intense radio emissions according to NASA. They monitored it with the Cassini spacecraft, and the radio waves it picked up were closely related to the auroras near the poles of Saturn, which are kind of similar to the northern and southern lights that we have on Earth. Take a listen. Sounds like something straight out of a horror film, doesn't it? Ugh, nightmare fuel. According to the researchers working with Cassini, I quote, "All of the structures we observe in Saturn's radio spectrum are giving us clues about what might be going on in the source of the radio emission above Saturn's auroras. We believe that the changing frequencies are related to tiny radio sources moving up and down along Saturn's magnetic fields." Now, at the time, scientists couldn't agree on a theory to explain the phenomenon, but noted how amazing it was that the radio emissions on Saturn sounded so similar to what was on Earth. Weird.
Starting off this countdown, we have Apollo 1. On January 27th, 1964, a fire took the lives of 3 astronauts during the launch rehearsal test. A damaged wire was the cause of this fire. Then a spark in the spacecraft ignited a flame. The high-pressure pure oxygen environment was the perfect catalyst for a fire to start. Then the foam pads and nylon netting in the craft added fuel to the fire. 4 astronauts struggled to get out and ended up perishing in the flames. Their last communication went as so. Ed White yelled "fire" into his headset. Then Gus Grissom yelled, "I've got a fire in the cockpit." Then the 3rd astronaut, Roger Chaffee, yelled "fire" as well. The last thing they all said was "get us out." This transmission was then followed by their screams as they were engulfed in the flames. The last thing they said was a plea for help for somebody to get them out of there before they died. Oh, that is so dark. It just sends shivers down my spine. In our 4th spot, we have the Lost Cosmonaut. Back in the 1950s, 2 brothers, Achille and Giovanni Giudica, were working as amateur radio operators. They gathered together old gear and set up shop in an old bunker. In 1960, they came across something pretty terrifying. So they claimed that they got signals from a Soviet cosmonaut that was lost in space. Apparently, she was returning to Earth's orbit when everything began to go wrong. Her spacecraft was malfunctioning, and in the recording, the woman, speaking in Russian, is pleading for help, saying it's getting hot. Then the spacecraft bursts into flames. Thankfully, they saved the recording so that they could share it with others. Now, the Soviets denied this, saying that it was an unmanned craft that burned. But the thing is, a lot of cosmonauts died during the space race. But the Soviet Union refused to reveal those deaths. Half the time, they would just cover them up. So it could be that this recording is real and captures the last moments of this woman pleading for her life.
Number 3 on this list is the fake moon landing. Now, before I continue with this entry, I do just want to say that we are entering theoretical land right now. Personally, I think the moon landing was real. I'd like to believe that humans made it to the moon back in 1969. Like, that just seems really cool to me, and I do think that it actually happened. However, if, for instance, the moon landing was fake, just going down this rabbit hole for a second, if the moon landing was fake, then that would automatically be a really scary secret that astronauts don't want us to know about. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are two of the most well-known names in history and certainly the most well-known astronauts. Well, if the moon landing was fake, then these guys were obviously in on it. In fact, all of NASA would have been in on it. Close to 20% of Americans still think that the moon landing was faked and that it was just one big elaborate fib. The biggest argument that moon landing conspiracy theorists have is that America had a massive motive to beat the Soviet Union there, and also that there would have been film technology good enough to fake the entire thing. This isn't necessarily proof though, it's just kind of speculation, and that's why personally, I do think that the moon landing happened. But on the off chance that these conspiracy theorists are correct and the moon landing was actually fake and was just actually doctored footage, then that may just be the biggest secret that astronauts don't want us to know about.
In our second spot, we have Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet test pilot, aerospace engineer, and cosmonaut. In 1967, he was sent on the Soyuz 1. The mission ended very badly though. Here's the thing. The spacecraft was very faulty. There was 203 structural problems with it. The thing is, Vladimir kind of didn't have a choice. He was forced to go on this mission. If he didn't go, then the backup pilot, who was his best friend, would have to go. And he said he didn't want to do that to his friend, so he went and sacrificed his life instead. Wow, that's just true friend goals right there. What a hero. Anyways, once he began to orbit Earth, a number of issues began to happen, like the antennas didn't open properly. It was his re-entry into Earth that killed him though. On April 24th, 1967, Vladimir crashed full speed into Earth after a parachute failure. Only a chipped heel bone survived the crash. His body was found as a badly charred lump. On his way down, translators heard him say, "Heat is rising in the capsule." He then began to curse the people who put him inside of this botched spaceship. He was yelling, saying that they killed him. His final moments were him crying and cursing in rage. As a result of this incident, Vladimir became the first human to die on a space mission. Imagine hearing those final moments though. That would just change your life forever. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Challenger. On January 28th, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart during the flight. It happened only 73 seconds into the flight. This resulted in the death of all 7 crew members on board. The crew consisted of 5 NASA astronauts and 2 payload specialists. Basically, what happened was at 11:39 a.m., the shuttle started to break down over the Atlantic Ocean. It started because of a failure of the O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. From there, the right solid rocket booster failed during takeoff. Then the force of the takeoff basically caused the rocket to break apart. Now it's thought that some crew survived the initial breakup, but the impact onto the ocean surface would have killed them. The last words came from pilot Michael J. Smith. All they heard was him say, "uh-oh," before they lost communication with them altogether. It's believed that the uh-oh came after they felt a huge jolt from the shuttle breaking apart. That's the last thing he ever said. It was later retrieved from the flight deck tape recorder from the ocean floor 2 months after this incident. Now, here's where it gets even darker and twisted. Apparently, a secret tape was leaked from NASA. On this tape, it was revealed that the recording continued on after the uh-oh. After that, you could hear someone yelling, "What happened? What happened? Oh God, no." And then you could hear screams and cries. Someone began to pray, others began to curse. One of the astronauts can be heard saying, "Can't breathe," choking. Another can be heard yelling, "We are dead." Now apparently this is a hoax and the tape has been debunked, but some NASA employees have admitted to hearing way more after the uh-oh. And NASA is just covering it up.